topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Are you ready to take a journey? Let's connect with the healers of the world. It's that time. It's time for the Language of Healing on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Now here's your host, Emotional Wisdom Training Specialist Nicole Fortin.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Language of Healing on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Joined here today with Lexi Hilderman. Hey. Hello. Lexi is an internationally recognized artist, amazing artist all around, so many modalities, and with a Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Fine Arts, and she's also an emotional wisdom training specialist. And today we're coming together to talk about spin cycles. And actually, Lexi and I have been working together probably the last month, preparing some of these topics that we've been bringing to you on the Language of Healing. And so often before the podcast or before the show, we have a pre-podcast and pretty much discuss everything that we're doing plus some. And I thought it would be nice, great to have you with us today because we can get into a bit more of like the practical nitty gritty, like how this actually applies to our life. Because I think that there's a lot of things said, right? Like you can read so many personal development books, many people talking about this, but the difference of really implementing it into your life and embodying the practices is like a whole different ballgame. And so, the last few weeks we've talked about the spin cycles, the guards and the gatekeepers. Going a little bit more into that today, talking about the wizard. The wizard is something that was developed by Kate Michaels, who is the CEO and founder of Emotional Wisdom Training Institute. And she has played with this idea, relating it to the Wizard of Oz. And so, you know how there's the Wizard of Oz, and all of his guards and gatekeepers that keep them from really coming in to seeing the vulnerable man behind the man behind the curtain. And so we're just kind of playing with it, a little bit fun. Anyway, not to get too heady with that. But so today we're talking about standing strong in chaos and focusing on what matters most, what really matters. So there's a lot of things going on around the world and maybe within ourselves, like emotional changes within ourselves and navigating new boundaries and all the things. So, Lexi, what does chaos mean to you?
Well, thank you for having me on the show, of course. But I think chaos has been one of those things since the time that we started talking just about the different programs. It's been something that's been in my mind in life. I've just been noticing moments of chaos. And I think for me at this current time, it's been a lot about all of the things that keep grabbing my attention. And so I can feel them in the back of my mind at all times. And so throughout the day, I'm just constantly trying to navigate through all of these different events or moments or things that I need to do. And it feels like chaos. And so you feel kind of like you're spinning around. You're kind of just there for the ride. And so that's kind of what chaos means to me right now, because it's kind of just going along with whatever keeps on coming up.
So it's kind of like the organizing of all the things going on. That's chaotic.
Yeah. And the overabundance of those things, I think that can happen in one moment in time, or that they keep on showing up.
Yeah.
And you get more and more overwhelmed by them, or more and more distracted by them.
It's like the straw that breaks the camel's back. It's never really oftentimes never really like one thing, right? That will set and trigger you off. It's like accumulation.
Yeah.
Chaos to me, I mean, I feel when I think of what chaos means, I right away go to like the physical sensation of chaos, like what that feels like in my body. And it feels like rushed, like many things going on in the head, right? It feels tight. I feel like there's not much space for me in chaos. I feel really like consumed by that almost. They're like trapped by it. Which is kind of interesting. Like even talking about the Wizard of Oz with the tornado reference, it's like tornadoes are chaotic. There's like everything is up in the air and like flinging around you, and just interesting that those times but there's also that eye of the storm, right? Like in the middle of it where there's none of that. So I think chaos has the two parts to it, like chaos and peace.
I think it's interesting too when you think of the tornado as a reference. It's like you think of the impending doom you can see coming towards you, right? The storm gradually grows and grows, and so I've always had that thought. Like when I was little, I'd have dreams about tornadoes, and it was always about the impending doom of that tornado coming to me. So I feel like there's like that pre peace and calm right before the storm hits. Then there's the storm, and then there's the chaos, and then there's the eye of the storm once you've broken through and you sit within that chaos.
And if you don't sit with the chaos, then you're just like spinning with it. Is that what
you're just being picked up in the cloud?
So what happens when you see this tornado, this impending doom coming? Like, what are you thinking about then? Like, what is it?
I think it's when you start to think of like all the possible things that can happen. And I think it, in some ways, I mean, there's times when I think it translates to me being like, oh, what if this happens? It's like all the what ifs.
Oh, those are good.
You know, it's like, what if this happens? Or what if that happens? Or what am I going to do about that when that happens, when it hasn't even happened yet,
Oh, it's so interesting that we do that, right? So, yeah. All right. So when we do encounter these spin cycles and the tornado, the impending doom, but seemingly like notice how like we do attach all of those things to it, like this. So really the spin cycles, like we've talked about, are coming from excuse me, like a conflict within our conscious body, subconscious mind, unconscious heart. Like there's a conflict somewhere in there where we're trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. Like this tornado is coming for me, like I don't like that, like what? That doesn't make sense. Like my whole world is about to go, anyway, I don't know if that's a great example, but so we're hearing from and operating from our previous like past feelings, thoughts, beliefs, like based on. So it's I think that number one, awareness, to notice, recognize that, oh, I've actually this, what hasn't happened yet, I've already attached so many things to it. And now I feel chaotic when the chaos isn't even there yet, right? Or and maybe when you're accepting of it, like maybe you move out of the way.
I think it's partly with the amount of information you're given to. So when you see that potential coming into your space, it's like you don't have all of the information. So you search in all the information you do have to find conclusion in it. And that information may not be accurate to that actual chaos that is about to ensue, right? So I think it's interesting because I notice myself attaching certain information because there's a lack of information of what's actually happening and what's like real and true in that moment. And so I try to find the information and build that information for myself to then make decisions and try to move forward with the only stuff I've got. Yeah,
because you want to show up like with the right tools, like prepared, like showing up to a Halloween party, like without, a costume or something. Yeah,
exactly. And then you're scrummaging around your car to find a costume.
Right. Yeah. Good. So what else? What have we got here for the audience today, Lexi? Well, we've been talking a lot about a good way to notice like the spin cycles or recognize them in yourself is to remember a conflict, like like a casual conflict that you've had recently, and And so just even like remembering back to something, it doesn't have to be big, right? But just a little bit like off, and you noticed yourself maybe attaching thoughts to it, like spinning, like, oh, then this is going to happen and that's going to happen. And what if this and what if that? And I should do this. I should have done that. Or so there's that, or there's like the replaying of the conversations, that we've had, that we haven't had.
Over and over again.
So these are like casual conflicts, right? They're creating a response in us or a trigger in us to help sort some kind of information. So what do we do with all that information? Like you said, Lexi, it's like overwhelming and there's lots of things to put around. So yeah, what do you think is the first thing when things are spinning out of control? That
I think for myself, the thing that is really important is one, recognizing the thoughts, feeling, and emotions that you're having in that moment. And so really like recognizing and being aware of where you are in it. And that's often my first step with it, is when I start to notice myself spinning out, it's recognizing that I've been in that place before. And so often that comes with me finding, okay, well, where am I in this current space? And like, what are the feelings I have at this moment? What are the thoughts I'm having? And so really recognizing all those things that are really real and happening for me in that spin. And then from there, I can use that information to move forward into other steps that'll help me to move out of it.
Yeah. I feel like that's a very wise, emotionally trained
Thank you.
response.
I try to do that.
Yeah. So before we get to all of that, like, because I like that you're receiving the information, like focusing on what's real and true. So that's a good place, to go to remember, because as you were talking, I'm thinking like, we need to, we all need to carry around a little notepad with us or something that every time. But I mean, these are a lot of questions to ask ourselves and stop and reflect on in the moment, because when we're triggered, it's like instantaneous. Yeah. It's just, it's so automatically entrenched, ingrained in us.
Well, I think that's something that really helps when you actually just look back at those different conflicts or casual conflicts that happen. It's once you look back at them and you start to reflect on, you take the time to reflect in a space that you're actually really stable and just like totally open to seeing it. I think those are really integral moments to being able to recognizing it in a current moment that's happening. Yeah. And so when you can recognize it, for one, you can actually see, where you were within that conflict. And so it's like taking that outside third person perspective to then go through the scenario again. It's doing a more intentional version of rethinking about it,
Yeah, because I think that we can all relate to that, where we've gone through something or had an experience where then when we step back and look at it from like even a future us, like, so we're looking at it from the past now, or just looking at it from another perspective, we actually see a lot more information, right?
Yeah.
But we're so associated in and so triggered in the moment, just reacting to that, and like, continuously spin. And yeah, like the spin cycles are good, right? Like we're trying to make sense of things that are up in the air. Like, where does this fit? Like there's a lot of things on the go. So, but yeah, so stopping and pulling away a little bit to look at it.
Yeah, I think so. And whether that's during the conflict or after the conflict's happened,
right?
I think they can be beneficial to do.
Yeah,
I think in conflict there is the need to be in there and fully experience it, but I think there is other options to potentially step out of it and be like, okay, whoa, pause for a second. I need to like figure out where I am in it. Yeah. But I think a lot of the time for myself, it's been in looking back at different conflicts, then I can really recognize it and find, say, things like key statements for myself to try to bring myself out for future conflicts.
Like what are some key statements?
Well, like I was telling you about this a little while ago, I have, because my spin cycles that I see happen are often just with me in my mind about whatever thing. They could be existential crises or about work or school or anything. And when I get into those moments, a lot of the time I get really caught up in certain thoughts about that, and I'll get really focused in on very specific thoughts, such as like, let me think of one thought. It'd be like, oh, I've got so much to do, and like there's all these things I need to do and I don't have enough time to do them. But usually in that, there's like, that's the only thought I give myself. And so a statement I created was, and I just did that. I wrote that down on a sticky note so that I could remember, and what else? Like, what else is there?
Yeah.
And that's been a really good one for me, because now I'm starting to ingrain that in my mind. In those moments, I'd be like, and what else?
Yeah.
Like, what else is there in this moment? And so instead of just thinking about, oh, I've got no time, or I have so many things I need to do, I'd be like, oh, well, I'm actually working really well on this project right now, and I'm actually getting stuff done. And so that's the and for me, is it's like the opposite side of the spectrum. And it's like, and you're actually working hard and you're very productive right now, and you actually got a lot done already.
Yeah. And laying down the foundation. Yeah, I like that. That's a really good practice, a good exercise, because we all know those voices in our heads that do come up, like the repeating beliefs that we have around ourselves, right? Like whether it be the guards, gatekeeper and gatekeepers, right? Like the guards being the other people, the finger pointing out statements, like they always, she does, he does, they do, my parents, the crowds,
anybody.
Anybody. And then the gatekeepers, the ones that the I statements, right? It's like I always, I never, I can't, I don't know, I'm always so busy. And then when I'm so busy, it's, you know, like the spin of, then I have, you know, no time, I feel rushed, I don't do as good a job, like I, you know.
And they continue to perpetuate each other.
And what else? Like you say, it's like, and I've, you know, I'm doing a lot of good work. Got a lot, you know, this is good. Laying down a foundation. It's like moving me more towards exactly what I want. Right. So it's not all like for a lost cause, but I mean, that's a good practice to see, to, you know, even I'm reminded of gratitude in that moment.
Yeah.
Of that,
it very much is, because
natural attitude of gratitude.
Yeah. And looking at it from a place of gratitude versus a place of spin. Spin or conflict or upset, I think. And because there's always two sides to it, I think. And we can get really focused on the negatives. And I think that's, I mean, you think of, you know, memories you have, a lot of the time we remember negative events, right? We can remember events that happened to us because they had a big impact. But all of the positive events, they kind of just collectively add to the next, right? And so we don't necessarily think of them, and those ones are those progress over time. So I can think of a lot of events that have happened in my life, and a lot of them are maybe not negative, but, you know, have a more negative tone to them. Yeah. And I remember them so clearly, but to look at those from a positive scope, it changes them, changes perspective on them.
Yeah, and I like that and piece that you add in there, because that create space for gathering evidence, like more evidence of the positive aspects.
And outside of the spin cycle, because the spin cycle is the repetitive thoughts, it's the ruminating, it's the continual back and forth between those thoughts. And so the and just goes outside of the circle.
Nice. Yeah, questions are good, or like open-ended things like that, like and ... like then your mind can go, oh, now I have another next mission, like new mission, come up with the and, you know, and then you're seeking, it's like, okay, what can I put there? Like, and I think the more you put that in, the closer and closer you get to the core, right? Like we do that a lot with emotional wisdom training, and even like the wizard process, like you have to go through the layers first to really get clear on what it is at the core, because we are really good at throwing up smoke and mirrors, right? We are. It's like, don't look too close, or like, don't get too close.
And even we don't look too close.
Yeah, true. Yeah, we
tell ourselves not to.
Yeah, or we like, get hard on ourselves, you know. And I mean, it just depends how you're coming at it. So like the new perspectives can really shift so much, especially around our mental, physical, emotional health.
Yeah.
Because we kind of tend to then identify with these things, these beliefs, as like that creates part of your day, right?
It does. Yeah. And they start to be the ones that you always go to and you believe about yourself.
Right. Yeah. And they become
or about others.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And they become your guiding factors of how you move through.
Yeah. There are just stories, and it's like the history. And it's pretty resourceful that we can do that, because, I think generationally, we've lived so long, as humanity because of storytelling. Right. And even before, I don't know how they did. It was just like an oral thing that they would pass down. And this is how you learned about the environment that you were living in. Like, this is useful information. If you want to stay safe, like, don't go into that saber-toothed tiger's den, and
it's all based on experiences.
Yeah. Right.
And it could be other people's experiences that we take on then. Which, not to say that's bad, they are very beneficial experiences to be able to add to our repertoire, and that's where we learn, and that's how we, come into the world as resourceful beings, because we've got the background of people that have taught us, we've got the background of our own experiences, but at the same time, those can be passed on to us then. If that experience was a specific experience, it can be passed on to that next person onwards.
Yeah, even just like the intergenerational belief structures. And I think, I don't know, I'm just kind of reminded, like, of right now in Canada and our present, like, there's lots of awareness, thankfully, around like intergenerational trauma with Indigenous communities. And that's so complex, like then, I don't know, these are just my thoughts now, kind of like, because I think that this is an example of somewhere that we spin, right? Because we've kind of been trying to get out of this cycle, but like, what will really get us out of that cycle, or help shift that, like that perspective, or because there's so many rich parts of that culture that I hope would still live on in that bloodline, and so anyway, maybe tangent, but it's like, yeah.
But I think I think the thing that comes up for me with that too is that it's like we all come from different beliefs in that as well. And that's why there is a little bit of the conflict there, because when there are certain experiences behind each different person, it's really hard to come together to understand it. And that's where that spin is, I think, is in not connecting on those different beliefs and not understanding the rich history that is there and the experiences that are there. And so we all come from those different experiences, but how do you connect them on an interpersonal level? And so when you come at that, and that's the spin, because you can't see the other person's experience necessarily until you do that say and statement, or move out of your own experience in it and come at it from a more open place. I think that's where that conflict exists a lot, is in the interpersonal, and the not having the information there to be able to actually approach someone, say, that does have intergenerational trauma, or you have your own intergenerational trauma, And
it's in so many areas,
so many different ways. And so you don't have any of the information because it's another person's experience and information to be shared. I think that's kind of where it can be, because it's hard to get that information unless you actively go out to do it.
Right.
And I think that's the stepping out of your own spin cycle to an extent. And because you can spin in your own, right? And then you can spin in the community. I think like we're so interconnected that it's like we spin in a community all together, but that's because we're all in our own experiences.
Yeah,
too.
gathering the same kind of evidence or supporting the belief. So the and is really the connector. It's like it almost brings a little bridge.
It does. It brings a bridge between you and me, for me to be like, and I see my story differently, and then I can see your story as well.
Yeah. And the subconscious mind is where our subconscious ego resides, right? Which is where we're hearing from our guards and gatekeepers, from our other people's statements and our I statements. And I was going somewhere good with that. But it was shoot, what were we? I
the
mean,
I's and U's.
Yeah, like I think just when we're trying to like understand, oh yeah, the subconscious ego, it wants and needs either one of two things, like more information or reassurance.
Yeah.
And so, and Kate Michaels and I just talked about this, it's like, and when you're giving reassurance when someone wants information, it's not it. That's not it. You're just like constant, like it just keeps gathering everything, triggering. So it's like honing in on that finesse, I guess, of like sharing the information that really makes a difference for that person or for that group or for you or for you. And with reassurance, right? Like, and that's, I think, comes back to the intention of it. But
well, I think that's interesting to bring up the reassurance, especially coming all the way back to our concept of chaos, is we get really, I think we get triggered by, we obviously get triggered by chaos, but I think it's even more so like the unknown that's in the chaos. And I mean, that's in the lack of information, that's in all those things, but we're really, I think we can get really fearful of being in an unknown place or being unsure about things. And that reassurance is what we seek because we're scared of the unknown, but really we need the information first.
Yeah.
To one, reassure ourselves by getting that information, and then reassurance from others actually strengthens that information.
Yeah.
I think it's
we need the other people to almost like strengthen our resolves, like our belief, like what we, to support and gather that evidence. I think when we're clear about what we want and we can effectively communicate what we need with others, like that makes a huge difference. And I think you were saying something earlier that made me think of, how it's a practice to really communicate what you're feeling or what you're going through while recognizing the other person's feelings and emotions. It's like not to take it away from you, but it's like there's a certain way to where because like it is interpersonal. It's so different. It's like there's no real prescription or textbook answer. No. And no it really is. Yeah.
Well, I think that is because in the interpersonal, it's like recognizing the position you even hold, and from recognizing that position, you can actually see the positions of others, especially if both people come from a place of recognizing where they are and like who they are and how they are. I think that makes a really big difference, because there's, I don't know, I think of conversations, like you can just have a basic conversation with someone, but do you really think about in that conversation, it could just be as simple as, oh, how's it going? Are you having a good day? Whichever. But are we really recognizing like, oh, this person's day might, whatever you tell me, this person's day might be so much more than those words that they tell me. And because we don't necessarily put that information out there, because I mean, barriers in how we can communicate, there's different levels of being able to break down that communication. I think it's even just going that one step ahead of yourself for recognizing that, okay, they're telling me this whatever thing in response to my question, but how much more information is actually there? And do we want to step into that conversation or not?
Right.
Yeah.
This depends on time and space and
exactly.
I mean, even interest, I think sometimes it's not even interested.
Yeah.
Like, but I mean that's a bit of a conflict too, I think, because, and this is the dynamic maybe we're experiencing now with like being so involved that just needing to like detach a little bit and separate. And so I think that can be, and if you need that, that's great. But how can you communicate that? Like,
you need that.
Maybe I just need that instead of it becoming another spin or evidence that like, I'm mad, they're mad. This sucks, It's very interesting. I think it's like, all relatable, as we see a lot of like division and conflict, like just everywhere, and I mean, it's the duality of nature. It's like just natural that we do have the extremes. So first step is really to just like stop and pause and breathe, because you have to reground, like when things are really spinning out of control. And we have a little comment there. Hello. And so yeah, when things are really spinning out of control, it's like you have to slow it down and come to a stop, if you really want to adjust position, but you can gather so much information when you're not spinning with it, and rather you're observing the spin, right? Gathering that information, that third person perspective. And then you're watching, you're listening, you're feeling, you're receiving, you're knowing, you're like actually getting to tune into all of your intuitive senses that might be overridden and by our habits, like by what we're just naturally doing, spinning about. So yeah, I feel like that's all I'm spinning with all of that.
I know, that's a lot of information.
Yeah,
I think talking about spins, and we've had this experience every time we've come together to talk about the show or different programs or things, and it's funny, when you talk about spins, you start to spin about spins, which is like the funniest. It's like the funniest experience, because you just totally step into that feeling of like what it's like to spin, and it's a fully embodied experience that I think everybody has experienced, and so it's super easy to step into.
yeah, because they're happening all the time. Like this is just a natural. It's like doing our laundry, like I mean it's just how we maintain and clean things up. Like, okay, let's just sift through this. Like, did we get everything? And we covered everything we need? Have I said everything? That's all that stuff. So then I'm just reminded by the list. The way you react about spins is important too. Yes, learning to react properly.
Exactly.
That's what it's all about, really. Actually, you know what it's all about? Acceptance.
It is. Yes, it is about acceptance.
Because when we're aware of something, so we're aware that the spin is happening, and then we can either choose to be in acceptance of it or in resistance to it. And the resistance to it is like that strong reaction, right? And acceptance doesn't mean being passive. Acceptance is really an empowered decision or empowered choice that allows you to gather the information with awareness, right? Like, and accepting even just what is real and true. What is real and true? Like there's some things you really can't, like if you're spinning in the middle of the night, like, and you can't sleep and you're just obsessively spinning your wheels, like what can you actually do at that time? Right? Like not much. I mean, if it's about yourself, maybe you can get up, write a list, like take some notes, right? Just to get it out of your mind or like moved on. But if it's like a conversation with someone else, like it's not going to happen then.
Well, I think it's that acceptance where you're like, I'm in this spin, and do I need to figure it out right now? Or maybe it is talking to the person. I don't know. It depends on your situation. But yeah, it's like really recognizing again where you are, like pausing for a moment and being like, okay, in this present moment, what do I actually need to do? And if there isn't anything you need to do, then I think there's like an acceptance of that. And it's accepting that you're in the spin, I think, is even an important thing to do.
Totally. It's like, the awareness of it. I mean, this is like in the quantum physics like field of, the particles, that when we like observe it or put attention on it, like it shifts, it changes its direction, it changes its pattern, like it's being observed, it responds differently. So awareness is like shedding the light. I was thinking of when you were speaking around the unknown and that feeling of unsafety. And I think when we're feeling unsafe, we think it's beneficial to like totally freak out, right? And let our energy get either like really small or really diffuse. And it's just interesting that and that's just a pattern, like a habit that we've trained ourselves in. But really what's more responsive if you're in an unknown place would be to be like calm and alert and aware.
Well, because I think even in those places, I think anything to do with like fear or the safety in it or feeling uncomfortable, we have certain patterns that we can easily drop into that we've taught ourselves to do, like a coping mechanism or things like that. They're the response, the reaction we give ourselves to that kind of feeling because it's familiar and we know how we dealt with it before. I think it's the same thing. It's like the same belief you play out, right? And I think that we go into that same cycle. And so does that cycle really serve us in that unsafe place or not? I think that's always something I think of. It's like I have, whatever response because I'm feeling unsafe, but what would actually make a difference because I'm not choosing to make a difference for myself in that place? I just like reverted into my shell in whatever way.
Yeah. Where's the and in that, right? Like insert and.
And it could be like insert and what do I really need in this moment? Or do I need to say anything? Or what is it that would really serve me right now?
Yeah, I think that's a big question is like, what do I need? What do I want? Getting really clear. So like somehow gaining clarity about what's going to best support you in that spin. And so by that, we can't really do that unless we don't like stop and look at what's going on. Yeah. So next time you find yourself spinning, well, number one, recognizing it is awesome. Yay. Good job. When like, you'll recognize that in different ways, maybe even just in like a bad mood, and without even really realizing it, you've got all of these thoughts that you just spun around in your head, based on all the old other times that, so yeah, stopping, looking, focusing on what's real and true. What's real and true. And I mean, truth is truth. And but there's so many beliefs, right? And so many structures, and maybe like truth is different to all of us, right? So I think when you're creating your life, or and you're an artist, I can just imagine what it's like in your mind to think about all of these moving parts and how you would make like a beautiful masterpiece out of it. Yeah. What do you do when you've got like an overwhelming amount of like materials, ideas, like where do you even begin to organize?
I feel like for me, being an artist and doing a creative practice is almost like being in a spin at all times, which is really interesting. And so I think that, I mean, to an extent, it's like you think of, my space sometimes feels like it's in a spin because there's like all these things that I've got in my place, and it's, all of this stuff, it's organized in a certain way. And it's like, I kind of stand there and I'm like, oh my God, it's chaos, but it's my mind. My mind is just this chaos. And somehow I find my way through it. Right. But I think it's interesting when you said that, I was like, oh, well, when I go through the process of like making a piece or doing a series, it's kind of like going through the process of a spin cycle. And it's really reminiscent of like when we move through that, and like when we move through spin cycles and go through that, like recognizing and replaying and like understanding what's happening, you really sift down. Like, I think it's very similar to the wizard process that we're talking about today, because it's like you start with an idea, and then there's all these moving parts, and you're looking at all the moving parts and all the potentials of what it could be, or what materials to use, or how the ideas fit together. And then once you start making it, it's like a clock or like gears. You start to like slowly shift them into becoming more and more refined. And it really gets right down to the basis of what that project's getting at. And so from all that chaos of ideas or materials or things surrounding that project, you get down to the one core idea of it. And once you've hit that, it's like that makes sense. It's that aha moment. It's like, okay, this is what it's about. And all these pieces were there to make this thing. And that's why I love process, because it's like, I can just see that process come out. And so like, I could go from, doing a drawing for a piece and doing all my thumbnail sketches. And then slowly I'm like pulling ideas together, and it's chaos. And then it gets all the way down to like, oh my gosh, that makes sense. Like, oh, this reading or article I was reading the other day made so much sense to my piece. And then I keep going through, I keep on pulling out all these informations, and then they suddenly all come together, and I understand what's at the core of it. And that's where the piece exists. And that's when I can actually see it in its entirety and it just like comes fully into its being. It's like such a settled place to be in, because then you're like, oh, I came from this place of complete chaos to settling on this idea, and this idea I know is fruitful with so much, like there's so much in it and so much color or so much.
Well, you know what, like everything that's come, you know, made it possible. I think that's a really good, you know, analogy or parallel to what we do when we're trying to figure out like the mess of our own lives and like create our lives, right? It's like figuring out, what do I want? Okay, I have all of these pieces. There's so many like unlimited possibilities. And it's easy to just get stuck spinning in the I don't know realm, which actually do know, you know, that there is like, you know, the palette, there's all of the information, you know, to draw from.
Exactly.
And I like that. So it really comes back to what it is that you want, like that piece to represent, or just intention. You know,
it comes to the intention, the concept, how those ideas come together, and like what you really intended to do with it in the first place.
Yeah. So coming back to the beginning.
Because
like when we spin, there's also a time where we could come back to the beginning of that spin, like, or the beginning of when we were first triggered. And it's like, oh, like what did trigger me about that? Like what can I notice about that now, looking back and from an outside perspective?
Yeah, exactly.
What might I be able to do differently next time?
And then noticing things that you didn't notice before, I think, is a huge thing. Because you could notice, like, oh, in that, you know, in an interaction I had, I didn't notice that person said whatever words, or that they had a certain expression, or you know,
sometimes we read it a little bit based on, we're reading it based on our eyes, like
and those potentially reactive eyes that are just in it, feeling everything full force.
So I think like the texting and the email world is dangerous for that, because sometimes, like, you ever have an email that you read twice and you're like, whoa, like I totally missed, like I didn't, but I think that's it. We just, the more we look at it, like we gather more information. But what if we could just come at it from like a fresh slate, like clean palette, and be like, oh, I have no
preconceived things.
Like nothing attached here. I'm just like totally curious, open, and receiving it as if I was, you know, in that childlike mind of the learner, of the beginner, of you know. And I think that's super important, even to be in that state when we're a master at something, when we're like really good at something, you know, instead of being like, you know, the teenager that knows everything. It's like,
I think it's exactly like the mastery cycle. It's like you learn to master something, and then when you realize you've mastered it, you actually haven't, because you continue to learn more. And it's like you continue to add to it, and so you never really hit mastery, but you kind of continue to be a student in it. You know, you're actually constantly in that paralleled or dichotomous relationship with yourself as a master and a student.
Because I think the master knows there's always more to know and learn and grow, right? So spin cycles are beneficial for us because they show us that there's a potential conflict going on. So there's something for us to organize, clean, you know. It's like a spot treatment. It's like, oh, well, this is really coming up, you know. And so then we're stopping, we're breathing, we're recognizing that the spin is going on. We're stepping back and we're looking at it from an outside third person perspective, being our own, you know, in our own wise guru stance. Imagine that you're someone else looking at it, right? Like what advice would you give to someone else that was in a similar situation? Or what might you notice about that? And then what else do you think is part of that?
One, I think replaying it is an important part in it. Is looking back, kind of like what we were saying, where you replay it and you notice new things about it. And from that, we start to gather that information more, and we hear it, we see it. It becomes so much more full of a picture when we do step out of it. And I think from there, we can actually make more clear choices and more intend differently to approach situations, either in the future or that situation in particular, it could be. But yeah, really, really looking at that, like the uncovering, discovering, and recovering thing we were talking about.
I like it.
Yeah, it's It's like uncovering what's actually there. It's discovering new things, and then also recovering, I think, ourselves in it to an extent. It's like recovering from the incident and really approaching it in a new way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, because you're just doing it differently. We had a comment, I think, Rachel, don't allow it to become overactive. Yes and no. I think because it's okay to let it become overactive. I think to let it like swing to that side, even if you're just letting it move through you. Because another thing that we get maybe confused with is that, oh, it's not good to do this. I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't obsess over this. I shouldn't worry about that. But like, actually, there's some good information in there for you. I think the quicker that you can become aware of it and accept it, like as a message, it's like, then you can move on with clarity. And like, that's the awakening. It's like, oh no, now I have more resources or a new information to make a more resourceful choice. Yeah.
I think that those should statements too can become guards and gatekeepers.
Yeah.
Right. So when we start to should on ourselves, that's what my mom always said. Don't should on yourself. But when we start to do that, they can also become those statements where it's like, I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't do that. Or by me doing this, it can cause whatever,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Based on past. I say that because I have seen it cause problems in relationships. Yeah. Yeah.
I think when it comes from a reactive place too, it can, reaction can cause many mishaps in communication.
I think just like noticing though, is it to suppress the feelings or to like, I think then maybe that's good awareness. Like, okay, when I overreact or I don't get my message doesn't come across. And I think this is where we didn't really talk about assertiveness.
But I think it's a key part.
Yeah, assertiveness is a huge part of it, which is, first thing, like knowing what you want, getting clear about that, and then sharing the information that really makes a difference. So it's like we said, if you've been really, you just need some space, like
it's asserting that
you can, and you can predict that event that, hey, if I'm feeling really tired and kind of grumpy and I need some space, and if I get into this interaction in this relationship that I know has a history of becoming triggered or activated by something like that, maybe preemptively saying something on a very neutral level, like as if you were sharing about the weather, like with no emotion attached. I'm tired. I need, 5 minutes in my room with the door closed. Anyway, if that helps, there's something to think about, because we could shift that a little bit, so I think the overaction is a good place to start. Like, okay, there's a conflict. Maybe I want to say something more clearly that isn't coming across. And then, we enter we'll hear from the guards, the gatekeepers, the wizard, or maybe even the man behind the curtain that's running the show with all the smoke and the mirrors and really just, wants to be appreciated or heard and recognized. And
And I think it really comes down to that. It's just wanting to be heard and recognized. And so we can take different actions by being assertive to really make sure that we come across in the way we want to for whatever needs or wants we have.
Yeah.
And it's not one set path, obviously. It's never one set path, but
we'll have to come back and talk more about assertiveness and clearing out that path for us next time.
Yeah.
We're out of time today. So thank you for joining me, Lexi. That was fun.
Thanks for having
chatting.
me.
And thank you, Nicole and Lexi. Great conversation. Yeah, thank you,
Rachel.
so much. Yeah. It was awesome to have your input, and thank you for tuning in and listening. And yes, any questions, comments, you can post in the chat below, and we'll see you next Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern, on the language of healing. And what will you take with you from this conversation that will support you for the rest of your life?
The world with Nicole every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, as together we become more fluent in the language of healing on W4CY Radio and Talk 4 TV. See you next week.